Stream RFP. My name is Lisa Hatina, and I'll be presenting to you today along with my colleague Lauren Petropoulos. I lead the capacity building stream under the Smart Renewables and Electrification Pathways Program, or SREPS for short. Lauren is a policy analyst also working on the program, as well as other initiatives increasing Indigenous participation in the energy transition. I'll be referring to the program as SREPS throughout the rest of the webinar. In this webinar, we'll provide an overview of the current request for proposals under the capacity building stream and provide an overview of how to apply. We'll also cover important things to consider as you develop your proposal. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you this morning from Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. All right, let's get started. This session will be recorded, and a recording in both English and French will be available on the SREPS Capacity Building webpage towards the end of November. In the meantime, we'll be sharing the deck with anyone who registered for the webinar in the next couple of days. We'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation using the Q&A function, which allows you to type and send questions into our team. The Q&A icon can be found in the bar of icons across the top of your Teams platform. Some guidelines are provided from our team in a post at the top of the Q&A. For our presentation today, first we'll be reviewing just an overview of the SREPS program, the eligibility criteria and funding availability for the capacity building stream, a timeline for this RFP process, a walkthrough of the capacity building proposal template, and finally a question and answer period. So let's start with an overview of SREPS. SREPS was initially created in Budget 2021 with a mandate to fund smart renewable energy and electrical grid modernization projects. The program was welcomed by great demand and as such has fully allocated its initial funding amounts totaling $1.56 billion. $25 million has been set aside for capacity building projects, which will be awarded through the RFP we're discussing today. Moving forward, additional funding for SREPS was announced in Budget 2023, along with additional program priorities, and the SREPS team is currently determining the best way to incorporate these priorities into the next iteration of the program. The objectives of the SREPS program are to decrease greenhouse gas emissions from Canada's electricity system, increase the number of electricity system assets that can contribute to system reliability, generate economic and social benefits, including job creation and increased equity, diversity, and inclusion in the energy sector, and increase renewable energy capacity or increase electrical grid accommodation of renewable energy. It's important to keep these program objectives in mind, as activities proposed under this RFP must align with these objectives to be eligible, and the extent to which they contribute to the objectives will impact the likelihood that a proposal will be selected for funding. SREPS has a number of different streams of funding targeting different ways to achieve its 4 objectives. The capacity building stream, which we're focusing on today, is targeted at projects which enable communities and organizations to acquire knowledge and the tools needed to strengthen their ability to participate in and meaningfully benefit from renewable energy, energy storage, and grid modernization projects. Indigenous engagement grants are also available and are targeted at projects which enable engagement and involvement of Indigenous organizations and communities in the development of renewable energy projects and storage projects. This stream also has an open request for proposals at the moment, which is covered in the same applicant guide as this capacity building RFP. A webinar was held Tuesday for applicants to that RFP, and a recording will be posted to the capacity building page by the end of November as well. The deployment streams have historically contributed to the construction cost for shovel-ready renewable energy and grid modernization projects. These streams are currently closed to applications, and more information will be shared once available Note that the structure and amount of support available in these streams when they do reopen may differ from what has previously been offered through SREPs. Now we'll move on to the eligibility and funding criteria for SREPs, current request for capacity building proposals. As I just mentioned, SREPs include the capacity building stream targeted at projects which enable communities and organizations to strengthen their ability to participate in and meaningfully benefit from renewable energy deployment. The stream provides funding for projects that build knowledge and skills related to renewable energy, energy storage, and grid modernization technologies, and support inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility activities. These projects enable historically marginalized communities and individuals to participate in the transition to low carbon electricity. SREPs aims to support projects across the country while encouraging the participation and leadership of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. The entities eligible to receive funding under this capacity building RFP are Indigenous applicants, including Indigenous communities or governments, tribal councils, national or regional Indigenous councils, tribal organizations, and Indigenous majority-owned and controlled for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. Canadian legal entities, both for-profit and not-for-profit, validly incorporated or registered, and also provincial, territorial, regional, or municipal governments and their departments and agencies. For the purposes of this funding, Indigenous includes Inuit, Métis, First Nation, status Indian, and non-status Indian individuals, or any combination thereof. SREPs is seeking proposals for community and or project-specific capacity building activities that are related to grid-connected, renewable energy, energy storage, and or grid modernization projects. For the purpose of this RFP, grid-connected means a renewable energy or energy storage project that connects and or generates power into the bulk electricity system or North American power grid. Remote projects are not eligible under this RFP. To receive funding, the activities must fall under the following: pre-development activities, including but not limited to feasibility studies, engineering studies, or environmental studies, supporting the advancement of Indigenous-led projects with a preference for 100% Indigenous-owned projects. Guidance, such as technical and financial expertise for Indigenous communities evaluating and negotiating economic development partnerships with a developer and or utility. Workforce training and integration activities that will increase inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility for future renewable energy, energy storage, and or grid modernization projects, including training and attraction and retention strategies. Note that proposals for activities that benefit a community or organization other than the applicant must demonstrate the community or organization's support for the proposed activities. On the previous slide, I specified that pre-development activities are only eligible if they support the future deployment of an Indigenous-led project. For the purpose of this RFP, Indigenous-led refers to projects that demonstrate clear support and involvement of an Indigenous community or organization throughout the different phases of the project, including planning, development, construction, and operations. Indigenous-led projects also demonstrate significant economic or other tangible benefits to an Indigenous community or organization. Project proposals should include records of support that demonstrate how Indigenous priorities and benefits are reflected in the project goals, outcomes, proposed activities, governance, and ownership structure. Here are some examples of activities that would be eligible under this RFP. An Indigenous community hiring an engineering firm to conduct a feasibility study for a renewable energy and or storage project they plan to own. An environmental study conducted by a developer who has worked closely since early stages with an Indigenous community who will benefit from and are supportive of the project, an Indigenous community enlisting an external organization to negotiate a power purchasing agreement with a developer or utility, a not-for-profit entity creating and delivering a training program that will enable members of an impacted community to access job opportunities related to a future deployment project, a municipal provincial utility run program to enhance ideas, so inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility of future training and recruitment for a proposed project. But note, this list is not exhaustive. Any kind of project that logically fits in the three categories, in one of the three categories, I should say, in the previous slide, and meets other eligibility criteria would be eligible. If you have questions about whether or not the project you have in mind may be eligible, you can email the the program mailbox prior to the start of proposal intake on November 27th, and we'll clarify that for you. More on timelines later as well. If successful in the application process, SREPs will fund up to 75% of the total project costs of a project, with a limit of a maximum of $2 million per year spread out over 4 years or less. Note that any cost considered part of the total project cost can be considered part of the 25% applicant contribution, and I'll go over this in more detail later in the presentation. SREPs will permit stacking with other government sources of funding to cover 100% of total project costs. This means if your project is able to secure the remaining 25% of project costs through another government funding program, that would be permitted under our terms and conditions. Eligible expenses include salaries and benefits for employees on the payroll of the applicant organization for actual time spent by employees on the project, professional, technical, and contracting services. Other eligible expenses would be field supplies, materials and testing services, printing services and translation, facility costs for training, seminars, conference room rentals, etc., but excluding hospitality, accreditation, license fees and permits, and honoraria for Indigenous peoples and costs associated with Indigenous ceremonies. GST, PST, and HST are eligible as the net of applicable tax rebates. This would be in accordance with NRCan's certification for the treatment of GST, HST, or PHST form, which will be provided by the program if the project is approved for funding consideration. Finally, if the applicant provides a justification and the program determines it's necessary for the project, travel and accommodation costs may be considered eligible, and eligible rates would have to be based on the travel directive of the National Joint Council. You'll find a link to that directive in the applicant guide. Note, the eligible expenditure period would begin the date a contribution agreement is signed by all parties. Now for ineligible expenses. These will not be reimbursed by the program, but may be considered as part of the total project cost. So these would include overhead expenses directly related to the project, such as office equipment and operating expenses. But note that the amount of overhead counted towards total project cost can't exceed 15% of the total eligible expenditures. Hospitality costs, even if directly related to the project, such as food and beverage for meetings or workshops, are not eligible, and in-kind costs are not eligible. Note that the above costs are considered part of the total project cost, so they can be considered part of the 25% applicant contribution, including in-kind costs. In addition to not being eligible for reimbursement, there are a number of costs that the program will not consider towards total project costs. These are land acquisition costs and associated real estate fees, project proposal preparation costs, tax preparation costs, Costs that cannot be deemed necessary for the implementation of the project, those associated with the protection of intellectual property, salary benefits unrelated to the project, for instance, employee bonuses, and costs incurred before the organization has been notified that it can begin incurring total project costs, or after the project completion date or March 31st, 2028, whichever comes first. Moving on to the timeline and process for this RFP. So here's an overview of the timeline for the RFP. SREPs will begin accepting completed proposal templates on November 27th, 2023. If you don't already have the template, you can request it by sending an email to the SREPs mailbox. We will accept proposals until January 31st, 2024, 11:59 Pacific time. Proposals should be submitted to the program mailbox as both a Word file and as a signed PDF, along with any supplementary information. Proposals will be checked for completeness as they come in, and will let you know if your proposal is incomplete, for instance, if a section has been missed. After January 31st, proposal revisions will not be accepted, and proposals will be evaluated as submitted by the RFP closing date. As this is a competitive process, we will not be able to answer any specific questions about your particular project or proposal once the submission period is open, so as of November 27th, and that's to avoid giving any applicant an advantage over another. That said, an exception is that we can let you know what is or isn't an eligible activity if it's not clear. For the same reason, we can't provide guidance during the intake period for improving your proposal, and we will not otherwise provide feedback to applicants during this time. If you have a general question about the proposal template or requests for proposal that would apply to many or all applicants, you can send it to the program inbox. Any clarifications or supplementary information provided while responding to these emails will be added to the capacity building webpage in a supplementary information section. After intake closes on January 31st, the proposal evaluation process will take place from February to April. We will not be able to accept any supplemental information or respond to questions during the evaluation period. Assuming proposals meet basic eligibility criteria, they will be evaluated by committee. Committees will be made up of NRCan staff as well as external subject matter experts, in particular with knowledge on the subject of Indigenous project leadership, as well as with expertise on inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. We will notify applicants of whether or not their application has been approved by May 2024 at the latest. If your application is approved, you'll proceed to the due diligence process, during which we'll request you submit additional information to verify some aspects of your proposal, and financials. Once details are verified, we will start negotiating a contribution agreement. Agreement negotiation takes on average about 3 months from the approval notification date to the agreement signing date. As previously mentioned, the eligible expenditure period will begin the date the contribution agreement is signed by all parties. Until a contribution agreement is signed, there is no guarantee of program funding. The contribution agreement will outline the requirements for issuing payments. Proponents will submit expense claims for project reimbursement on a quarterly basis, so every 3 months. Indigenous applicants may be eligible to receive flexible funding, which allows the applicant to redirect funding among eligible expenditure categories within the same fiscal year, and request advance payments for expected project costs. More information on this option would be provided during the due diligence process. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Lauren Petropoulos, who will explain each section of the proposal template in detail. Over to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Lisa. Now we are going to review the proposal template. Each slide will explain what is expected in each section. I want to remind everyone that all this information is available in the applicant guide and/or the proposal template. Please read the applicant guide carefully, as it has everything you need to know to apply. If any questions come up when you're filling out the proposal, feel free to contact us anytime at the SREPS inbox. We accept documents attached as annexes, so if you have letters of support, you may submit those with the proposal. As well, we've maximums throughout the proposal to guide you for how much information we'd like. As a rough estimate, 500 words is a full page of single-spaced text, so 250 words is about half a page single-spaced. The first section of the proposal is where eligibility information of your organization and project are outlined. First, you will fill in information about your organization and contact information. Beside type of organization, you will select from a drop-down list of eligible organizations, which include various types of Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities and organizations. For Section 2, you will describe how your project connects to SREP's program objectives and eligible activities outlined in the applicant guide. In the first box, you will explain how your project will support at least one of the SREP's program objectives. For the second box, you will select at least one of the eligible activity types listed that apply to your proposal and provide a brief description of that activity. You will select and describe all that apply. So if all three activity types will be completed during your project, you will select and explain all three. Finally, in the third box, you will describe how your project relates to a future deployment of a specific grid-connected renewable energy storage, and/or grid modernization project. Here, you will also tell us about what your next steps will need to be to advance the future deployment project after the capacity building activities are complete. The third section is for a description of the proposed project, where you can expand on your project in more detail. At the top, you will include your project title, location, and timeline. The timeline refers to the period of time to which you are seeking funding. The maximum timeline for a project will be 4 years. Next, input the total project cost and total funding request for NRCan. NRCan can cover 75% of eligible project costs, so please ensure that this is reflected in the funding request. A detailed budget will come later in the proposal. Moving on to question 1. In this box, you will describe your project in a brief, non-technical, and non-confidential summary. Tell us clearly what the project will do and what issue your project is focusing on. There is a 150-word suggested maximum here, so please keep it focused. The second box is where you will describe the project goal or multiple project goals if you have them. Here, you will also tell us about if your project builds on past work and how the project will increase inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. This leads nicely to the third box, which is for project benefits. Here, you will describe any technical, social, environmental, or economic benefits associated with the project and why the project is important now. Here, we are looking for details such as how the project is going to benefit Indigenous communities or members of an underrepresented group in the energy sector. More information you could include would be the community-specific needs or regional energy challenges or priorities that the project is responding to. We will also evaluate the long-term benefits from the project. For example, how the project could be replicated in other communities or how energy costs could be reduced in the long term. This box has a higher word count, maximum of 500 words, so we would like to see these benefits described in detail. This part of the project description is where engagement with Indigenous communities and organizations or other collaborators on the project will be discussed. In the first box, This is where you will explain how you'll be engaging with Indigenous communities, organizations, or other project stakeholders who will be partnered, involved, or consulted on the project. If some engagement in relationship building has already taken place, please discuss this as well. This section and the overall project will be evaluated on if the participating or involved Indigenous communities, organizations, or other project stakeholders will be engaged meaningfully throughout the life of the project and that there are plans in place. Preference may be given to community-driven projects with strong community support, participation, ownership, leadership, and/or benefits. In the second box, I would like to note the call out for separate attached records of support, such as a letter of support or band council resolution from the involved Indigenous communities and/or organizations. If this is not applicable to the project, you can explain this in the box below. An example of this could be if you are completing a workforce development project and you don't necessarily need a letter of support. Next, you will be describing the risks that are associated with your project and the mitigation plan for these risks. Examples of risks could be technical, financial, consultation, or business risks. So please include what is applicable to your specific project. We are looking for anything that may prevent the project from moving forward, like hiring difficulties or delays. This section will be evaluated on completeness, and you will not be marked lower if you have more risks identified. We want to see that your project team has thought through various risks and how to mitigate them. Section 4 is where you'll tell us about your organization and how the expertise and experience of your team will enable you to carry out the project successfully. First, you will discuss your organization, and then you can break down individual team members' experience in this area of work and what their role will be in the project. Attaching each team member's resume or CV is not required, and our team will not be reviewing resumes or CVs. Section 5 is where you can provide information about any partner organizations or collaborators who will be working on the project with you. This could be other government organizations, for-profit or not-for-profits, or other communities or organizations. These organizations are not directly on the project team in Section 4, but will be involved with some aspect of the project, for example, carrying out a particular study. Moving on to number 6, this is your opportunity to explain the breakdown of your project and list out the project tasks. In the description section, make sure to list who is responsible for that task, which would be either the project team or a partner, for example. Lastly, for each task, please write out the corresponding output or result, completion date, and estimated cost. You will repeat this process for all the tasks that are part of your project and that you are seeking funding for. For the project plan, we will be evaluating how activities in the project will contribute to program objectives and how they will support the development of a future renewable energy storage, and/or grid modernization project. On to the project budget section. At the top of the budget table, you will need to fill in the shaded yellow row. This is where you'll total the full amount of funds you are requesting from NRCan, broken down by fiscal year, where the start of the fiscal year is April 1st. It may be a portion of the total project costs, with a maximum of 75% of the total project costs. Total eligible expenditures plus total ineligible expenditures plus total ineligible costs must add up to total project costs at the bottom of the table. Please note that the ineligible and in-kind rows are also broken down by fiscal year, so please make sure that this breakdown appears in your submission. The budget details box under number 2 allows you to provide additional details that are not necessarily reflected in the first budget table. Specifically for travel costs, we would like to see a justification as to why those travel costs are necessary for the project. We will be evaluating this section on verifiable and accurate estimated costs. Finally, the third box is where you will include, if applicable, if you are receiving funding from other organizations or governments. You will also include your own financial contribution to the project in this table as the applicant organization. This is the last section of the proposal I'll discuss in detail, which is the declaration and conflict of interest sections. There are multiple points under the declarations, but I'd like to draw your attention to point 11, which details giving NRCan consent to share your proposal with other organizations listed. The benefit of allowing us to share your information is that we can pass your project idea on to others if there's a better fit for your project. Secondly, you must complete the conflict of interest attestation shown here by answering yes or no to these statements. Finally, you will need to sign and date the proposal. So we have come to the end of the presentation portion. Now we will begin our Q&A session. If for some reason you have to leave but have outstanding questions, please connect with us through our program inbox. So the address is there on the left. We will be answering questions that have been published in the Q&A tab. So feel free to click on that tab now to see the questions or to ask your own. I will stop sharing my screen now and we can get started.
Okay, hello everyone. I will be reading out the questions for Lisa and Lauren. So you'll start here at the bottom. First one, if a community participated in the first round of SREPS funding, are they eligible to receive funding through this stream if the project is different enough?
Yeah, I can take that. They're definitely eligible. There isn't any particular kind of higher weighting for a proposal like that, and they wouldn't be penalized either for having received funding in the past. So,
can a First Nations band apply to the program for different projects? Example, wind farm and a hydro project.
yes, absolutely. They could submit 2 proposals in that instance is what I would suggest, so they can be evaluated separately. Just given that, you know, the merits of each proposal might be quite different, partnerships might be different, that sort of thing. So that's what I would recommend.
Are projects in the Yukon, which is an isolated grid, not connected to the rest of the North American grid, eligible for this funding stream?
So I mentioned that the definition of grid connected for this RFP means that the project that would be supported by the capacity building activities would have to be eventually connected to the bulk electricity grid. So in that case, no, we're not. Projects in the Yukon who are on a separate grid would not be eligible. And just that may not be the case for future capacity building calls under the SREPS program, but we have a limited amount of 25 million in total for this RFP, and we wanted to narrow the scope so that we could support projects that have maybe a stronger chance of being supported by future SREPS deployment funds that have been announced under budget 2023. So that's why the scope is a bit narrower for this round, but yeah, hopefully that gives a little bit of an explanation of why remote projects haven't been considered for this RFP.
All right. Can this stream be used to procure equipment or buy green tech?
No, that wouldn't fall under the eligibility criteria. I think those aren't eligible expenses, and so I mean it would depend to some extent. I know we do allow the purchase of small equipment for training activities or things like that, but it can't solely be used to purchase equipment. No.
Okay. If a community is seeking to be grid connected as part of the project, would that be eligible, or does the community need to be connected already?
If there are plans to connect the community to the grid, definitely that suffices as far as eligibility goes.
Can you clarify if Indigenous participation in a project is a requirement to be eligible for the capacity building stream funding or just for the Indigenous engagement grant?
It's required for some of the activities. So the pre-development, the group of activities under like the first two bullets under eligible activities on that slide or in the applicant guide. So pre-development activities, there definitely has to be Indigenous involvement of an Indigenous community or organization. It needs to be an Indigenous-led project. And then obviously that second category of activities, eligible activities, would be helping an Indigenous community sort of work towards a partnership or negotiation with a developer or a utility. So those would definitely require Indigenous involvement. The third category, not necessarily. That one for workforce training and development, retention strategies, attraction strategies, training, basically creating job opportunities and training opportunities for individuals and communities that in the past have not really, I guess, reaped the benefits of energy development projects. So that one is not specific to Indigenous communities, but the other two types of activities are.
If you are an Indigenous community where there are a number of renewable projects being developed, can you apply for funds for training to prepare community members in general and not have it tied to a specific project?
Yes, so activities can be specific to a community as well as specific to a project. I believe that in the applicant guide, the way it's worded, you'll see it says, you know, either community specific or project specific.
Would equipment purchases required for a training related proposal be eligible?
That depends on the equipment. So, I mean, Maddie, I think you might have a clearer answer for that one, just in terms of what is and isn't eligible.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like you were saying earlier, small equipment is eligible for training, webinars, training sessions and all that. We would ask probably in your budget submission to just clarify what these equipments are and why they are required under the project. And then we would, you know, give you feedback based on that. So it really does depend. But small equipment for training purposes and all of that are eligible, yes. Okay, next question. Will any proposals be evaluated before the February to April 2024 evaluation period? Or is there any preference given to applications submitted earlier in the November 2023 to January 2024 application window?
So no, there's no advantage to submitting a proposal early, other than if you're missing a section in your proposal, like if it's incomplete, then we would have time to get back to you and you would have time to complete that section and send it back to us. But otherwise, there's no actual evaluation of proposals taking place until after the submission deadline. So no advantage to, I guess, a small advantage to sending it in early, but not as far as submitting a complete application or proposal.
Okay, this next question was already responded to by Lauren, but would this webinar recording be available for the public? And the response was yes, the recording will be made available later in November. Does this funding allow for projects to focus on energy efficiency upgrade feasibility?
Can you just reread the first?
Yeah,
part of that?
sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, I refreshed and I lost it just a second. Does this funding allow for projects to focus on energy efficiency upgrade feasibility? I'm so sorry. I don't know why I'm having issues reading that.
So no, it does cover some feasibility studies for Indigenous-led projects, but not energy efficiency. It would have to be renewable, grid-connected renewable energy or energy storage or a grid modernization project. And I know that's narrower in scope than the previous capacity building round. So hopefully my earlier explanation about why we are narrowing things a little bit is helpful. We received 5 times the number of proposals that we could fund last time. So we don't want to, we wanted to be more specific about the types of projects that will support the SREP's objectives this time, so that more of the strong proposals that are submitted can actually be funded.
Okay. Are feasibility assessments and/or community energy planning eligible for this stream?
What was the first part? Feasibility assessments?
Yes.
I'm not sure exactly what's meant by feasibility assessment, but that sounds like something that would be eligible. I would encourage that attendee to maybe send an email to the mailbox with a little bit more information about that. The second part of the question was if energy efficiency mentioned again, or was it something else?
Community energy planning.
Oh, community energy plans. So community energy plans, no, because it's not specific. It's not capacity building activities that are specific to a that are tied to a specific deployment project. So we have supported development of community energy plans in the past. So if a community energy plan leads to the identification of a project that would be pursued, then this RFP would cover the kinds of activities that would then advance that specific project to deployment.
Can a company submit multiple applications for multiple different projects?
Yes, I think given that we have 25 million in total, and depending on how many project proposals we receive, it's possible that we would determine based on evaluation scores and the merits of different projects, we would determine that we might fund 1 or 2 of the projects and not all of the projects. Let's say if there's 5 or 6, but we wouldn't discourage any organization from submitting multiple proposals.
What is the total funding available under this RFP?
So the total funding, I think they're asking like total for all proposals. So I mentioned it's 25 million. That's basically everything else from the first 2 rounds of funding announced for the SREPS program that we've been able to spend as a program has been allocated. So it's 25 million for this RFP.
And I'll just repeat for folks that might have joined late that the maximum dispersed to an individual project would be $2 million.
I think
Over
that
4 years, yeah.
Pretty much answers the next question, which was, can you
Okay.
clarify if the funding per project was 2 million total over 4 fiscal years or 2 million per year up to 4 years? And so it's total 2 million over 4 fiscal years or less.
Correct.
Okay. This one has a nice note. Hi there, thanks for the webinar. Hoping to confirm that feasibility work is covered even if the project does not go forward. For example, assessing wind and storage in an area, grid connected, through engineering, environmental, etc., pre-work. If we determine the project is not viable economically through this work, is this okay?
Yes, so you know, there's risks with every project, and with applicants contributing up to 25% of their own contribution towards the project, they're taking that risk as well. So, you know, we're aware of that risk. I think one of the mandatory selection criteria for for evaluation of the proposals, which you'll see in the applicant guide, is the likelihood that a project would lead to deployment. So if you can communicate in your proposal, sort of, I guess, to what extent the project is close to deployment readiness, that will, I guess, result in a stronger grade on the proposal. But we understand and want to support projects that carry risk. That's part of the purpose of the capacity building stream, is to reduce that risk to the applicants.
Do you mean involvement of Indigenous communities, or must be Indigenous-led projects to be eligible?
Can you reread that, please? I'm not sure I totally understand that one.
I assume it's relating to a previous response, but do you mean
Okay.
involvement of Indigenous communities, or must be Indigenous-led projects to be eligible?
The pre-development activities, that first bullet under eligible activities, those activities must be Indigenous led. It's not necessarily specified elsewhere. So if you need further clarification, maybe send an email to the SREP's mailbox. I know it's hard to have any kind of back and forth in a Q&A session with this format, but if I haven't sort of answered your question, we can answer it by email for sure.
Okay. How are you going to decide among proposals? What is your ranking or criteria going to be to decide among proposals?
So the criteria are in the applicant guide, and there's we use a scoring framework. So there will be evaluation committees, a number of committee members. I mentioned committees are made up of individuals who have a good understanding of the program, good understanding of the technologies involved, and then we have a number of team members who have been working with Indigenous communities as well as developers on Indigenous-owned projects. They have a lot of experience across Canada with those projects as well. And then we'll have external evaluators who are non-federal government, have regional expertise, have community-specific expertise, and have an understanding of sort of the context, the more specific context of these projects. So committee members will use the evaluation framework to assign a score. It's quantitative, and then come to a consensus on that score as well in consensus meetings. So it's a fairly quantitative evaluation process, but incorporating contextual knowledge, both from the internal evaluators to NRCan as well as external evaluators. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, this stream seems focused on electricity decarbonization. Is a project ranked better if it also allows for heat decarbonization?
I wouldn't say so. I think the priority is the electricity is reducing the emissions associated with electricity generation. That's the that's sort of the eligibility. That's what the eligibility criteria are built around for this particular RFP. So hopefully that helps. It doesn't necessarily like give an upper hand to have a heat component to a project.
Okay, are business development activities eligible expenses?
It depends on what the business what business development means. So if it contributes to, if it has to do with partnership development, like business development can mean a lot of things. So if it has to do with partnership development that would potentially advance a future deployment project that is a grid connected renewable energy project, then that's kind of the key. It has to be tied to a specific project, and it has to advance the potential future deployment of that project.
Did I hear that the pre-development activities, including feasibility studies, are only available to Indigenous-led projects?
Yes, yes. So they are only pre-development support for pre-development activities is only eligible for applicants that can demonstrate that there is Indigenous support. It doesn't mean that the project will be majority owned necessarily, although we did specify that 100% Indigenous owned projects have an advantage. But they need to be Indigenous led in that there is benefits, tangible benefits to an Indigenous community or organization, and that the applicant can demonstrate the support of that Indigenous organization or community, and ideally that they are that it's demonstrated in the proposal work plan and the activities that are being proposed that that Indigenous partner is integrated into the activities and involved.
Would a battery energy storage project need to have exporting to grid functionality?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah.
I'm not in a technical headspace.
No worries. Would a battery energy storage project need to have exporting to grid functionality?
If it's only storage, then yes, I would say so, because it has to. I don't want to give a hard yes. I'm leaning towards a yes on this one. But I'd like to clarify it with the team before I give a hard answer on it. But I'm leaning towards thinking that it would have to actually add power to the grid. So yeah, that's kind of a maybe leaning to a yes, and we will provide more specific information on that in the supplementary information section of the capacity building webpage. But if you can send that question to the mailbox, we can make sure that we get back to you directly on that.
Is a for-profit project with a minority Indigenous partnership eligible for this funding, specifically for the pre-development activities?
Yes, the ownership is not so much necessary for eligibility. There will be a preference for majority owned or 100% owned projects, but to be eligible, we need the applicant to demonstrate that the project has the support of an Indigenous community or organization, and that it would involve potential benefits to an Indigenous community organization.
Is this program available for the 3 territories?
So because the projects have to be grid connected, it isn't. And that's not, like I said, that's not necessarily sort of the future of, that's not necessarily true to all future calls under SREPs as far as capacity building goes, but we did want to focus on grid connected, bulk electricity grid connected projects for this particular RFP.
I just want to jump in that I wouldn't want to rule out any project in the territories. I would just make sure that if that community is connected to the North American grid, then they would be eligible. So not giving a firm answer that all the territories are ineligible. It just depends on your community and if you meet the definition of grid connected.
Would this stream have a refundable component to it once the project is operational?
No, it's non-refundable. Capacity building funding is non-refundable because they're not generating revenue as a direct result of the activities that are funded under capacity building. I know that there are, refundable scenarios under deployment funding agreements, but it's not applicable to capacity building.
Yeah, okay, we don't really refer to it as repayable. That's
repayable.
Yeah, that's what I assume.
Right.
Yeah, was meant by that question.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured. Okay, just for clarification, in order to potentially obtain the full 2 million of funding, total eligible project costs would be 2.6 million. I can take this one. So I'm assuming that you mean 2 million would have to be 75% of the total project costs. So I note here you wrote eligible. So no, as long as 2 million is the cap for 75% of the total project cost, so including ineligible costs as well. But yeah, we cannot contribute more than 75%. So if 75% is less than 2 million, then we could not give more than that to go up to 2 million. Does the maturity level of an organization matter for eligibility and/or the review process?
So one of the evaluation criteria is the organization's ability to implement the proposed activities. So I would say experience. Like I don't know if the age. Did it say the age and experience of the organization? Like how long the organization has existed, or what was
the maturity level?
Maturity level.
Mm-hmm.
I think different factors will play into it depending on how the applicant frames their ability to successfully implement the proposed activities. Maturity level might play into that, but it's not something that is being evaluated sort of as its own criteria.
Can the applicant organization be a Canadian utility?
Yes, it can. So I would say, yeah, a Canadian utility is eligible for any of the eligible activities. I know some of those eligible activities might be unlikely to apply to a utility, but they are eligible if they have a project that is eligible under the eligible activities. Or I just said eligible 8 times, but.
You mentioned that Indigenous applicants may request in advance towards eligible costs. What would be the minimum ownership percentage required by an Indigenous community in order to request in advance?
You want to take that one, Maddie?
Sure. Yeah. So they would have to be majority Indigenous owned, which means 51% ownership or more. And I just want to say that, yeah, they can request. It's not necessarily guaranteed. We go through a process, a review process internally to determine if the applicant will receive the advance payment option. Is there a target timeline
Wait,
for
sorry, Maddie. I might take the opportunity just to mention there that the percent ownership does not, you don't have to provide documentation to prove percent ownership with your proposal, but it is something that during the due diligence process would be reviewed, particularly for Indigenous engagement grants, which we're not talking about today, but if you are looking at applying for an Indigenous engagement grant as well, those are only available to either Indigenous organizations or those that are majority owned. So that piece of information, I guess, is pretty critical to securing an Indigenous engagement grant. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that while we were sort of on the topic of majority ownership.
Is there a target timeline for the implementation of the completed project, not just the capacity building components?
There's not a target. I think when we're evaluating proposals, those that are closer to deployment have I would say an advantage just in terms of how they'll be scored on likelihood to result in a deployment project. But there isn't a specific criteria as far as eligibility goes. It's more a measure of, it's more, I guess, it falls more under how projects will be compared who are like under a competitive situation, I guess, if they score similarly otherwise. I know we're getting close. I don't know if a number of people have hopped off, but we'll keep going. If there are a few more questions, we'll keep going until 12:15.
Yes. Okay, there are some more questions. How does the evaluation process determine if a project will receive the full 2 million or another amount?
Can you repeat that, please? Sorry.
Yeah, I can also probably take this one if you want. How does the evaluation process determine if a project will receive the full 2 million or another amount?
Okay.
So definitely depends on the total project costs. As I was saying earlier, we can't exceed 75%. Other factors that might come in, it's definitely project by project, but if there are other sources of funding, like other federal or provincial programs, that are also contributing to the project, that might be, a consideration. But it definitely is project specific.
Yeah, I would add generally we want to support 75% of the total project costs where we can. So if the, if the eligible expenses and eligible activities all align, then it's likely to be a 75% contribution.
Perfect. Related to grid connected, is it mandatory for the generated power from renewable sources to be fed back onto the grid, or can it be completely at the site on the customer side of the meter?
One more time, please. Sorry.
Related to grid connected, is it mandatory for the generated power from the renewable sources to be fed back onto the grid, or can it be completely at the site? And then in brackets on the customer side of the meter.
I think as long as it has the potential to contribute to, if it has the potential to be fed back to the grid, then that is likely acceptable. This is another one where I'm like, oh, this is a little bit of a gray area. So I would appreciate receiving that question by email so I can make sure we have a clear answer on that one.
Not to distract from the topic of SREP's capacity building, but it seems there is some confusion about requirements for Indigenous participation. Can you please clarify the difference between SREP's capacity building and SREP's Indigenous engagement grant? Thank you.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a lot more funding available under the capacity building stream. There's $25 million. The Indigenous engagement grants program has $500,000 a year for Indigenous engagement grants total. And the amount is 50,000, like the maximum amount for an Indigenous engagement grant is 50,000 per year. That said, the program covers 90% of expenses for under an Indigenous engagement grant. The funding is provided up front. There's limited reporting. There's less claims being submitted. So there are some activities that would be eligible for Indigenous engagement grants and capacity building funding. It's up to the applicant to determine, I guess, how much funding is required and whether you can meet, whether you can prefer to receive less funding and contribute less as an organization, or receive more funding and contribute more as an organization, depending on the activity. The eligible applicants and eligible activities for each are separate. They are distinct. So I would say take a look at those, but generally we are recommending that applicants, if you think your activity fits under both, look at, the eligibility criteria, look at what the funding availability and opportunity is, and decide which one is a better fit. If it's still not clear, I would submit it to the capacity building RFP. And if during like the early stage of evaluation, when the program team is reviewing proposals for like whether they meet basic eligibility criteria, if we determine that your proposal would be better off evaluated under the grant or the capacity building stream, the other stream than it was submitted to, then we would contact that applicant and ask if you want to be evaluated under the other process. But one of the reasons we say submit to the capacity building stream in that case is because the proposal template is a little bit more in depth. So we would have the information we need to evaluate your project under either the capacity building stream or the grant, Indigenous engagement grants. And there's more funding available under capacity building. So hopefully that helps.
Okay. Can you have a project that increases renewable capacity but not related to the energy grid?
I mean, that project does exist, so would it be eligible? I think it just depends on whether it meets the eligibility criteria. So I'm not I would have to sort of know a little bit more about that project, but I'm wondering if maybe previous answers have already answered that question. If not, send it to our mailbox, and that way we can kind of, have a back and forth if necessary to reach the answer to that question.
Okay,
maybe we can do one more.
And we have two more.
Oh, we have two more. Okay, let's do them. Okay.
Okay. Our project's focused on capacity building in racialized communities related to the electricity transition, where they do not currently have the capacity for direct ownership of renewable energy projects, but projects can help them build that capacity. I guess
I
asking if
think
that's
the answer
eligible.
is yes, but I just want you to read it again because the first part
Yeah.
I may have, yeah.
So our
misunderstood.
projects focused on capacity building and racialized communities related to the electricity transition, where they do not currently have the capacity for direct ownership of renewable energy projects, but projects can help them build that capacity. Because they're asking if that would be an eligible project.
I think for this particular RFP, that would only, like, if it's not an Indigenous community or organization, but another marginalized community, it would be, that type of activity would be eligible under the third activity category, which is the training and the training and recruitment strategies and that sort of thing, just in terms of increasing opportunities for that community associated with a future deployment project. But as far as the pre-development activities go, for this particular RFP, the community support has to come from an Indigenous community, which we've defined, or Indigenous community or organization, which we've defined as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit for this RFP.
Okay, and then the last one, and I believe I could answer this one. So once a contribution agreement is in place, how do you anticipate funding to be released? Will it be on a milestone basis or monthly invoice? This will help factor in cash flow. So payments are made on a quarterly basis, and the standard processing time to receive payment once we receive your quarterly claim is 30 calendar days. But as I mentioned earlier, if you are eligible for advance payments, we can provide funding for the upcoming quarter. If not, we just provide reimbursements on the previous quarter's expenses. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending today and for your excellent questions. And we will post all of the information that has kind of come out of the answers to these questions will be posted to the supplementary information section of the capacity building webpage in the next week or so. Other than that, if you didn't get a sufficient answer to your question, we'd be happy to hear from you at the SREP's mailbox, and we can work towards a more sufficient answer. But yeah, thank you once again for your interest in the program, and that's everything for today.
Thank you.
Bye now.